Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Jawad Tehami as Ayza Omar is on her annual leave, so I'm filling in. Indian occupied Kashmir has been under military siege since 5th of August as it lost autonomy owing to the revocation of Article 370. The curfew and the complete communication blackout has entered its 43rd day today. The situation there has turned into a huge humanitarian crisis owing to the shortage of food and medical care as well. The Hurriyat leaders and activists have been in detention ever since. Indian Supreme Court ordered the Indian government to make every endeavor to restore normal life in Jammu and Kashmir as soon as possible. On the other hand, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has urged the world community to go beyond mere statements and act now to avoid a potential disaster. And to talk more about the situation in Indian occupied Kashmir, we are joined by Mr. Munir Akram, former ambassador of Pakistan to the United Nations in our Islamabad studios, and Mr. Shabir Hussain, a journalist from the New Delhi, and Manpeet Singh, coordinator of the World Sikh Parliament from London. Mr. Manpeet, do you think after this order by the Indian Supreme Court today to its government to bring back the normalcy to Indian occupied Kashmir, do you think the Indian government will follow this order?
Well, thanks, Jawad, for having us on the show. I think, to be honest, if you ask me the state of judiciary, I would like to get your attention and get the attention of the people watching this show towards 3 months ago, Supreme Court itself said, the judges itself said that the democracy does not prevail anymore in India. This was a statement from the Supreme Court judges, retired judges. What I want to say is, like, no matter what judiciary says, Modi government is adamant to actually pursue its Hindutva, the agenda of Hindutva, the fascist regime's agenda of Hindutva. Now, it does not care. We've seen what's been happening in Kashmir from last 40 days, complete subjugation, incarceration of the people of the valley. I mean, we have seen how they've demolished the temple of the Dalits. We have seen what they are doing to the Sikhs. They are on actually a mad race of rampage, and they want to spread this fear into the minorities. Now, I don't think so. This is gonna help anywhere. Now, my brother has just explained with the quote of Mirza Ghalib. I mean, I think this is the reality. This, as a minority in India, we all feel and share the same pain, no matter we are Dalits, Sikhs, or Kashmiris. Now, I would like to add one more thing. On 27th of September, when Modi will actually give its rationality towards this clampdown on the Kashmiri people to the United Nations, Tamils, Sikhs, Dalits, they all have actually come together to protest in the capital of India, which is Delhi, Jantar Mantar. They're going to be protesting while he will be giving his rationale behind this obnoxious decision to repulse democracy. Now, obviously, we all can see the situation. It's not just limited to the diaspora. It's all the minorities in India have realized that if we want to live in India, we will have to actually give up our own religions. We have to give up our own identity. And that's how the only way we can live in India.
Manpreet, just stay with us. I'll take this point to Mr. Munir Akram, the former ambassador and the permanent representative of Pakistan to the United Nations. Sir, how do you see this latest order by the India Supreme Court for its government to bring back the normalcy to India? Do you think the Indian government has that gut of following this order in letter and spirit?
Well, I think the Indian government is committed to its plan. Its plan is, as your other guest has said, a part of the long-term agenda of the RSS and the other Hindu parties. So I see great difficulty for politically and otherwise for the Modi government to change its course of action.
Okay, sir, how do you think if the Indian government doesn't follow this order, what exactly would be the options for the Indian Supreme Court in order to make the government to follow these sort of orders?
Well, I am not very cognizant of the Indian legal system, but as a normal Supreme Court, it can ask for enforcement of the order. It could declare the government illegitimate and pursue other legal options. But legal options are what are available to a court.
Mr. Akram, Pakistan has continuously been raising the voice for the Kashmir cause internationally on every single forum. And in this very month, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khan, is also expected to address the United Nations General Assembly session and try to shake the conscience of the world community. What do you think, what we can expect out of this visit of the Prime Minister of Pakistan to the US and his address to the General Assembly?
Well, I think it's obvious that this address by Prime Minister Imran Khan will be a very important statement of Pakistan's position. I think he would wish to explain what the Modi government has done and what the Modi government's plans are for Kashmir and for India as a whole. It is a momentous occasion that he will address the General Assembly. What will come after? I think what comes after will depend on, firstly, what happens on the ground in occupied Kashmir, and what the international community, how the international community responds to the case which the Prime Minister will present to the General Assembly.
Okay, Mr. Akram, do you think that it is also expected that during this visit, Prime Minister Imran Khan might have meetings with US President Donald Trump? Do you expect anything substantial coming out of those meetings, or it would be just the reiteration by President Donald Trump of the mediation offer that he has already made before?
Well, I think Mr. Trump has stepped back from his offer of mediation after meeting Mr. Modi in the G7 summit. So I'm not certain whether that offer is still on the table. I think we cannot depend on just the United States or Mr. Trump. We have to mobilize the whole international community. And I think that is going to be the purpose and objective of the Prime Minister's presence in the General Assembly, is to mobilize as much support as we can from various quarters in the world.
Okay, Mr. Akram, please stay with us. I'd like to go to Mr. Shabir Hussain. Mr. Shabir, what do you think? I mean, there have been 2 alerts by the Genocide Watch about India. So how do you think has the international community responded to these alerts, and what should it have actually done in response to these genocide alerts by the Genocide Watch?
I said this on one of the earlier shows of Indus News. I repeated that while we are thankful as Kashmiris to the world fraternity, but I believe enough has not been done. UN is within its mandate to put a lot of pressure. It can put a lot of pressure on India. Countries like US and UK and other European nations, they can really put a lot of pressure on India and question and raise an alarm about on regular basis what it is doing in Kashmir.
So, okay, what do you think?
And it's not just
what do you think had been those areas or those reasons the international community didn't respond to these actions of India so vociferously as it should have done before?
Yeah, I think while it has done exceptionally well, the Committee of Nations in raising the concern, but it has not taken any steps that could deter India from, going ahead with what's going on in Kashmir and in India as well. It could put pressures, economic pressures. I think the world fraternity should stand up and impose sanctions on India.
Okay.
After all, it's India is under the grip of vicious fascism, and the minorities, the Kashmiris, and as one of my fellow panelists, Mr. Manpeet, said a while back, nobody is safe in India. And it's not just about Kashmiris who are fighting for their right to self-determination. It's about Indians also. Many Indians who are forced to live as second-class citizens.
So, Mr. Shabir, do you think there are certain examples in history in which a certain belligerent nations or the nations which were annexing certain areas illegally to their own territory, were there any actions taken by the United Nations, and what were those actions? Would you like to share those couple of examples from history with our viewers?
I think we don't need to go that far back in history. We have the example of Israel. There are so many countries that have boycotted Israel. I don't think the kind of campaign that we have seen against Israel, we don't see that happening in case of India. Even if the proportion is that much, I think it would definitely put pressure on India.
Okay, do you think the economic sanctions could be one of the best options for the international community to follow so that it can impress upon India to stop its atrocities in Indian occupied Kashmir?
Absolutely. Why not? Organizations like United Nations and the OIC have to shoulder the responsibility and show and wake up to this challenge. They cannot just issue casual statements. This is the time to act, or history will never forgive them.
Okay, Shabir, stay with me. I'll come back to you, and I'll now move on to Mr. Manpeet Singh. Manpeet, there are certain reports of the protests by the Sikh community all over Punjab to express solidarity with the Kashmiris. How do you see those protests, and what value do they contain in order to impress upon Indian government to stop its atrocities in Kashmir?
See, I think, to be honest, minorities, if you ask me honestly, minorities don't hold any value to India. I'll tell you this frankly. All the solidarity that we have shown, maybe in India or maybe like in London, even I addressed to the crowd of the Kashmiris, there was thousands and thousands of Kashmiris and Sikhs, and ranging from 90-year-old to 6 years old. And I have seen that sort of solidarity in the protests. Now, our ambition is to actually wake up the international community on this unilateral subjugation of the people of the Kashmir. Now, we stand in solidarity. As I said earlier, it's not just the action for solidarity or a gesture of solidarity. We share the same pain. What's happening in Kashmir now has happened to us 35 years ago in Amritsar, in Delhi, in other states of India, where Indian army has actually bombed the holiest place to the Sikhs, which is Akal Takht Sahib and Harmandir Sahib. What I want to say here is very clearly, our message is loud and clear. All the minorities, Tamils, Sikhs, Kashmiris, Dalits, Muslims, we all are together now, and leaving no doubt, we are very clear that in India, if we have to live, we need some rights, we need some special rights, we need international community to support our movements for self-determination under the international law. Now, just bringing your attention to the points, India has actually raised official reservations to this international law of the United Nations, which is the Covenant of 1966 of self-determination. Now, India has raised its position earlier, and now it is actually made its stubborn stand clear on the people of Kashmir. Now, I'll give you another example. Recently, the Sajjan Kumar was
Mr. Manpeet, I'll come to you and I'll take your view on this particular thing. We'll delve deep into this particular point that you're raising. I'll now move on to Mr. Munir Akram. Sir, after Imran Khan, the point just raised by Mr. Manpeet that all the minorities in India are feeling insecure And similar sort of apprehensions have been raised by Prime Minister Imran Khan that it is not only the Muslims of India who are under threat, the existence of other minorities is also at stake. So after he has highlighted the Kashmir issue and this sense of insecurity in all the minorities in India, what do you think are the options for the United Nations to impress upon India or to enforce its own resolutions there?
Well, the United Nations, of course, can do a number of things. As you have seen in the case of other countries, there have been economic sanctions, there has been a censure passed by the Security Council or the General Assembly. Beyond that, the United Nations itself cannot do very much. At most, with the consent of a country, that can send a peacekeeping force. But the United Nations does not have its own army to enforce its decisions. Those decisions have to be enforced by member states who agree to do so. In the case of a large country like India, it is very difficult to imagine that a United Nations decision, first of all, can be passed to sanction India, even though it's committing such crimes. And secondly, that any country would be willing to send a force to enforce a decision by the international community. So that is India's protection. The best, I think, that can be done is to name and shame it, to hurt its image, and to let the people of India know that the Modi government has dragged the name of the so-called largest democracy in the world into dust.
Sir, you have just mentioned that there are certain limited options at the hand of the United Nations, but when we go through the purposes and the principles of the United Nations Charter, the very purpose of the founding of the United Nations was to avoid war and uphold the dignity of humanity. So if it has the limited options, there must be some other options other than sending in the peacekeeping force in order to make India not violate any international law or the UN resolution that it passed in the favor of Kashmiris itself.
Look, I think if there is an international consensus that India is committing massive crime, and the great powers and the movers and shakers of the world agree to that, then you could have a situation where you could call for a ban, for example, on investment in India, a ban on trade with India, and so forth. But I see that as a very remote possibility, given India's size and given the fact that most countries want to benefit from India's market, and therefore are willing to turn a blind eye to the crimes that the Indian government is committing, has committed, and is likely to commit in the future.
Mr. Akram, please stay with us. Now take Mr. Shabir Hussain's view. Mr. Shabir Hussain, what do you think could be the options? As Mr. Akram just mentioned, there are a couple of limited options at the hands of the United Nations in order to enforce its own resolutions. What options do you think the United Nations can adopt now?
You see, we are actually here talking about a judiciary that sends people to the gallows, saying that it did so to satisfy the collective conscience of the masses, you know? So day in and day out, we see hardcore criminals, people who lynch minorities going scot-free, and we also see upright officers like Sanjeev Bhatt, the former top IPS officer, landing up in jail for speaking the truth.
Okay,
you know, I'm just trying to make a few more points because I thought I didn't elaborate on it enough.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
There is no rule of law in India, unfortunately. So I don't see any hope that the Supreme Court will challenge anything or thwart anything that this Hindutva government does.
Okay, Mr. Hussain, a journalist, was joining us from New Delhi, and he was delving deep into the situation, the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in occupied Kashmir as the curfew and the communication clampdown in Indian occupied Kashmir has entered the 43rd day. Now, I'd like to move to Mr. Manpeet. Manpeet, as we have seen a couple of days before, Pakistan's Prime Minister in his interview with a couple of international media channels has said that any conventional war between Pakistan and India could turn into a nuclear conflict. And how do you see the world community should have responded to this particular statement?
To be honest, I've already earlier said on this show that the world community need to actually go beyond their trade relations with India. This is what they need to see. Now, are these world communities who actually promise to be a guardian of the human rights of the people, are they ready to bear the responsibility of the another genocide of the people of Kashmir? Are they ready to take that blame on them? If they are not, they need to actually make their stand clear. We've already had enough lip service when it comes to the people of Kashmir or the people of Punjab. It is not enough. They need to make their stand clear that are they preferring their trade relations or are they actually worried about the humanity? Now, I'd just like to second a point raised by Shabir earlier. What I was trying to say was recent conviction. This is not me saying it. This is the High Court of India saying it, that India has actually, in the Constitution of India and the law of India, even the crime of the genocide is not criminalized at all. So even if they have to actually, send somebody in for genocide, the law is not criminalized at all. What I want to say is, want to make a very clear point. India law is lopsided, is not actually able to deliver anything. This law was there, this constitution was there when the genocide of the people of Punjab was happening, when the genocide of Sikhs were happening, when the genocide of Muslims in Gujarat was happening, and now when the genocide of people of Kashmir is happening. This law
Mr.
was
Manpreet,
there.
Thank you very much for giving your detailed insight regarding the situation in Indian occupied Kashmir. I'd like to move to Mr. Munir Akram. Mr. Akram, what do you think? You had been the part of the UN system, and what do you think what could be the immediate steps for providing the relief by the world organizations for the people of Kashmir since the curfew and the clampdown has entered the 43rd day today?
Well, I think obviously the first and most important step at this time has to be the lifting of the curfew and the lifting of the communications blackout and the ability of the world to provide essential food, medicines, etc. That must be running very low in occupied Kashmir because of the clampdown. So that's the first and most immediate step. But equally important is for the world to know what's happening, because there are various reports coming out of Kashmir. There are reports of thousands of people being incarcerated, but also thousands of people being taken out of Kashmir. So the question is, has the ethnic cleansing, which we fear, has that ethnic cleansing in occupied Kashmir already started? And are they taking Muslim youth, Muslim men out of Kashmir to be replaced by Hindu supremacists and to fulfill the objective of transforming Kashmir, occupied Kashmir, into a Hindu majority area? That is a question that can only be answered once the lockdown is lifted, once the world begins to see what is actually happening in occupied Kashmir.
Thank you, Mr. Munir Akram. We'll be staying with you and we'll be taking your analysis on the next topic that will come after break. We will take a short break, and after we return, we'll discuss the future of the Afghan peace process. So stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire. US President Donald Trump abruptly called off the peace talks with the Taliban. The negotiations ended without any tangible results after 9 rounds of talks in Doha. Despite the negotiations with the US, the Taliban had been launching attacks on the Afghan security forces and the foreign troops. The Taliban had insisted on a timeline of the complete and the early withdrawal of the American and NATO troops. Currently, 14,000 US and 17,000 NATO troops are stationed in Afghanistan in the non-combative role. Taliban delegation met Russia's special envoy on Afghanistan, Shabir Hussain, in Moscow. Russia stressed the resumption of talks between the US and the Taliban. Meanwhile, the Taliban's spokesperson, Suhail Shaheen, confirmed at the meeting, saying that Russia has been briefed on the progress in the Afghan peace process. To talk more about various aspects of the Afghan peace process, we are joined by a journalist, Mr. Rahimullah Yusufzai from Peshawar, and Mr. Intizar Khadim, a senior journalist from Kabul. And also, we are joined by Mr. Munir Akram, the former ambassador and the permanent representative of Pakistan to the United Nations. Thank you for being on the show. I'd like to kick off the things with an opinion from you, Mr. Yusufzai. What do you think led to the US President Donald Trump's abrupt calling of the peace talks with the Taliban?
I think a number of reasons were given by Trump and the US media. So it is their viewpoint, and they believe that Taliban are responsible for the increase in violence and that they cannot be trusted. So that's why the talks have been called off. If you ask the Taliban, they say everything was decided. Only the peace agreement was to be announced, and that the draft was handed over to the government of Qatar to make it public through the Al Jazeera TV channel. So they say they don't have trust in the US government and especially President Trump. These are two different viewpoints, and I believe that the US has said that he still wants to withdraw his forces from Afghanistan. Mike Pompeo was saying that the talks could be resumed if Taliban, behave, if Taliban reduce the violence and also agree to certain conditions like a ceasefire and an agreement to talk to the Afghan government. So I think, maybe if the talks are resumed eventually, the US would push for some of these demands to be accepted. We don't know if Taliban would do that, but there is every possibility that efforts would be made to resume the talks. It's not the end of the process.
Okay, Mr. Yusufzai, do you think that the reason that was given by President Donald Trump was that the fatality of one American soldier? And do you think this reason is good enough for the US President to call off the peace talks, since there had been already a loss of many lives from the both sides already?
I believe Trump was looking for an exit, and he came up with this very lame excuse: one American soldier getting killed in a war which has claimed so many American and lives, and also the lives of their allies and the Afghan forces and civilians and Taliban. In fact, 16 American soldiers have been killed this year.
Okay,
well, it was still going on. The talks started.
Okay, I'll come back to you with this, and now I'll move to Mr. Khadim. Sir, what do you think after all these rounds of talks between the Taliban and the US, till the 8th round of talks, positive statements had been coming from both the sides. So what exactly had been the irritants that led to the failure of the talks after the 9th round?
The Donald Trump tweet came in a very bad time. It was a bad call in a bad time. When we wrapped up the 9th round of peace dialogue in Qatar, we were hoping that we have to be inking a deal with the Taliban, and I think finally the Afghan bloodshed will be stopped. Donald Trump is a very emotional person. His worldview is so out of touch. He did not understand what's really going on in the world, and he has been filled in with imperfect information. And that's the fear that I have right now in my heart. The Washingtonians, the policymakers who are just advising him, I think they intentionally do not want to advise him rightly, or Donald Trump is the type of person who's not taking the advice and following the advice rightly. Killing one American soldier cannot be a very positive logic for continuation of war. How about the 2,300 other American soldiers died in the last 15 years? How about the 300 Afghan soldiers in Taliban and civilian are dying every day in Afghanistan? So how you can continue the 9th round of peace dialogue for 9 and 10 months and suddenly you just tweet and stop everything? On the face of earth, where you can find such logic? So I can divide the emotion in Afghanistan by two parts. One is the hardcore government employees in the some analysts in some other people who are just watching the peace dialogue. They are happy about the peace of Donald Trump, where the peace dialogue has stopped. They said that it was a very incomplete deal between the Taliban and the Khalilzad because a lot of information and content has been kept hidden in dark from the public view. And other sympathizers and softcore people are still hoping that something good will happen in the future. It was just like a fair fight, which was not serious thing. It was diplomatic tactics where Donald Trump would like to force Taliban to back down from their rigid conditions they have put already on the table. So personally, I'm thinking there's still a lot of room for the Taliban and for the Americans to resume talk because there is no B option. Either you continue fight for 100 years or either you ask for peace, which is the right option. Now, the only thing I can say for you is it's an atmosphere in Afghanistan mixed and filled with hopes and fears. At the same time, we think that we can go worse, where American will just came to fold their tents and leave from Afghanistan. And second is that it will continue again for another 5 or 10 years, and another casualty massacre show will happen in Afghanistan, and then a lot of people will lose their life.
Okay, Mr. Intizar, I'll come back to you with more things to delve into. Now I'll move to Mr. Munir Akram, sir. Despite the negotiations going on with the US, why do you think Taliban have been continuously launching attacks against the Afghan security forces and the foreign troops? Was that to maximize the leverage and speak from a position of strength on the negotiating table?
Yes, of course. I think that these negotiations were undertaken with the explicit understanding that the fighting will not stop. Both sides have been fighting. Both sides have been escalating attacks in order to gain advantage for the negotiating table. It's just that the Taliban had momentum. They attacked 3 towns in the past few weeks. So I think that was not a principal reason for the breakup of the talks. I think it's you have to read Mr. Trump's Art of the Deal book. This is how he operates. He's unpredictable. He does dramatic gestures. His main preoccupation is his re-election, so he will do any drama in order to gain prominence, to show himself in a good light. And if organizing the talks at Camp David and then calling them off is part of his strategy as such. So I don't think that it is a serious breakdown. It is a breakdown, but many breakdowns happen in such critical negotiations that are taking place now.
Okay, Mr. Munir, Pakistan's permanent representative to the United Nations, Malia Lodi, gave a statement and told the United Nations Security Council that Pakistan's role was as a facilitator in these peace talks between the US and the Taliban. So what do you think could be the effect of this failure of peace negotiations on Pakistan?
Well, first of all, I don't think that the negotiations have failed. Secondly, Pakistan has been sincere in trying to get these talks off the ground, because I think it's in Pakistan's interest, first of all, to have this agreement between the US and the Taliban, but then more importantly, to have an agreement between the Afghans themselves. And that the Taliban had made a condition that they would first want to get an agreement on the withdrawal before they started talking to the Kabul government and other Afghans. So it's important that this first step is concluded, so that the negotiations, the intra-Afghan negotiations start, because those will be the real important negotiations. And without intra-Afghan peace, there will be no peace and stability in Afghanistan, even if the Americans leave.
Okay, Mr. Munir Akram, I'll come to you. Now we'll move on to Mr. Rahimullah Yusufzai. Sir, Taliban have always insisted on a complete withdrawal of the foreign forces within months. And why was the US not in a position to give a specific timeline for that? Is it because of the fear or the political vacuum that might lead into a civil war later on?
This was one of the main sticking points. There were a lot of negotiations on this point about the timetable of withdrawal of US forces, because the Americans had in principle told the Taliban that they want to withdraw. But they wanted a longer timetable, and eventually I think it was decided according to the draft of the agreement, which is still a secret, that they will withdraw 5,000 troops. The statement came from President Trump. Again, very impulsive and very unpredictable.
Okay, Mr. Khadim, the Afghan presidential spokesperson has said that a legitimate peace deal with the insurgents will be considered only if after the upcoming elections. How do you analyze that?
Well, I tell for a spokesperson how you say it. Donald Trump is coming with few statements from nowhere. These type of spokespersons come with same logic from nowhere. Why not with this government? And why not in the last few months? Why not today? Why you just put all these things and make it politicized? It's a choice between election and a peace deal. Election means putting again some few strongmen on power to enjoy the amenities around the country, be on the top of easy power and control the resources. And peace means that 300 people will not die. So there should not be a logic that you say that my option or no option, or you say that highway or my way. It should not be like that. You have to take gauge between the wrong things and the right things. See, it could not be an easy and appealing decision for President Ghani and his team to come up with a solution, to come up with an idea, to come up with a position where peace should be prioritized in election. So I do not buy what the spokesperson of President Ghani is telling. It's more selfish and narcissistic idea than to be a nationalistic idea. It's not national polity. I still believe that democracy in election is my identity. As a youngster of the last 18 years since 2001, I do believe that my identity is election. And if I want to have a legitimate democracy, definitely I have to have a legitimate government, and that will be through election. Definitely, that's something that I have to do. But
okay, Mr. Intizar, thank you very much for joining the show at Indus News. Now I'll move on to Mr. Rahimullah Yusufzai. Sir, as the Taliban had threatened and also attacked the election campaign, do you think after such a statement by the Afghan government that the legitimate peace deal with the Taliban would be considered only after the elections, the frequency of the Taliban attacks will increase?
There will be no big attack on the election process. They have given this threat. They believe the elections are a hurdle in achieving peace in Afghanistan. We have to see, because the elections are now very near on 28th of September. There is still uncertainty, although the election material has been sent to all the 34 provinces. President Ghani is insisting that the election will take place. And his main rival, Abdullah, who is a partner also in the Afghan unity government, has gone along with the election, although he said recently that he is willing.
Okay, thank you very much for being on the show. Mr. Rahimullah Yusufzai was joining us from Peshawar. Mr. Munir, do you think that Taliban, when they recently visited Moscow and expressed a willingness to resume the dialogue, what do you think it could impact the intention of the US so that it could come pretty sooner on the negotiating table back?
Yes, well, I think that as far as the Afghan negotiations are concerned, the Russians are not very far from the positions of the other major powers. I think all of them want to see an agreement happen. All of them want to see some form of peace restored and the violence ended. Because the major preoccupation of the Russians and the Chinese and of Pakistan and Iran is the terrorist threat from the Daesh, from the Islamic State. That has become the major preoccupation of most of these major powers. And there are other terrorist organizations which are located in parts of Afghanistan which are of concern to these major powers. So I think that going to Moscow is not necessarily that the Taliban are trying to create leverage vis-a-vis the US. I think it's the same process. I think the US and the Russians have been in touch, as have the Chinese, on the situation in Afghanistan.
Mr. Munir Akram, thank you very much for being on Newswire today, and thank you the other participants of the show today as well. So many of the stakeholders in the Afghan peace process are hopeful of the resumption of the peace talks between the US and the Taliban, and now time will reveal what transpires out of the whole effort. That's all for now, and we'll see you tomorrow with an in-depth analysis of the latest happenings from around the globe. Till then, it's goodbye.